Okay, my next guest is a paranormal investigator, psychic and medium, and an author and speaker all rolled into one. She's going to be talking to me about some of her interesting experiences in the paranormal as Victoria Mundae, author of My Night in the Most Haunted Hotel in Texas, joins me on the show on this episode of Passion for the Paranormal. Well, greetings, fellow truth seekers, and welcome once again to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and it's so wonderful to be back here with you once again. And in my new book, Walking in the Shadows of Strangers, I document my journey from a curious skeptic to a believer in the paranormal. And this covers close to 10 years of my journey into paranormal investigating. And I talk about some really great locations, over 20 haunted locations. Some of these stories are a little bit creepy and may even be a little bit unsettling to you when you read about them. And also share some really cool ghost stories that others had shared with me through the years. So I hope you check out the book. You can head over to my website at theParanormal.com. And there you can find a link to order the book. You can also go to Amazon, type in my name there, and you'll find a link to order the book. You can order the book in Kindle version. If you have a Kindle Unlimited account, you can borrow a copy of the book for free to read it, or you can also order the paperback version. And getting back to the show, I'm really excited to have Victoria Mundae joining me on the show. And she's been doing paranormal investigating for a number of years. As I said, she's an author as well, and now she's writing both nonfiction and fiction genres. And really excited to talk to her about her new book and her story into paranormal investigating. And if you have a family member, a friend you'd like to know about this, you'd want to let them know about the show, share a link with them, let them know. And whatever podcast app you're using out there, just simply hit that subscribe button. And I'm really eager to get into this discussion with my next guest, Victoria. So really hope you're going to enjoy tonight's episode. And thank you so much for tuning into the show. Okay, so joining me tonight is Victoria Mundae. And Victoria is an author and a paranormal radio host. And she is a contributing author to several literary compendiums. And her writings have appeared in the paranormal literary journal, The Feminine Macabre, a woman's journal of all things strange and unusual. She has also been profiled in the book A Walk in the Shadows and in the TV miniseries The Shadow Dimension. In addition to writing paranormal investigations and embracing the woo-woo of life, Victoria co-hosted the long-running and popular paranormal podcast, Edge of the Rabbit Hole, and later joined the paranormal panel podcast, Black Lotus Live. With hopes of helping paranormal and esoteric subjects emerge into the mainstream, she created the wildly popular Victoria Mundae's Paranormal Activity book series for both adults and children. Upon deciding to take her writing career to a higher level, she's teamed up and joined forces with Beyond the Fray Publishing, a publishing house that caters specifically to the paranormal and true crime genres. And she's writing in both fiction and nonfiction paranormal genres. Her latest book, which I guess we're going to be talking about tonight, is My Night in the Most Haunted Hotel in Texas, which is available now on Amazon. Victoria, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to finally meet you. I was thinking, like, how long have I really known you? And I was like, it's been years, and I've never, ever actually spoken to you. So this is just like really a nice treat.
Yeah. You actually just recently published this book. Is that right? Back in February?
In February, yes.
Okay. All right. Great. And so this is primarily your experiences at the Jefferson. I think you cover a few others in the book, because I kind of just browsed the book. So you kind of cover your extensive experiences in the Jefferson Hotel. Mm-hmm. And then there's a few other kind of additional stories. Is that right?
Right. It was right before February, or right before Valentine's Day last year. My little voice told me, you need to get up and go somewhere. And so I ended up going to Jefferson, Texas, which is a little bitty town in northeast Texas, really, really close to Louisiana, like Texarkana, really. And when I got there, I went on a Wednesday, and I was checking in. And so the owner was taking me up to the room I checked in. And he's like, "Why did you pick this room?" And I was like, "Well, I didn't want to sound like a dolt or anything." I was like, "Well, because I looked online, I didn't want to know any of the histories or anything." I was like, "Well, it was just the prettiest room." I didn't know. And he goes, "Well, this is the most haunted room, in the hotel." And I was thinking, well, of course it is. Where else would I go? It's the most
Right.
haunted hotel.
So
So,
were you just kind of drawn to this particular room, or how did that?
yeah, because when you look on their website, it has all the pictures and there's little descriptions. So I was doing this, so I wouldn't actually see the descriptions. And it's just a gorgeous hotel. And this was and I love, I'm Southern. I love old antiques and everything like that. And this was an old antique bed. It was super tall. It was probably, the headboard's probably at least 10 feet tall. And it has all the big pillows and everything, all the accoutrements and the clawfoot tub. I'm like, oh, that's the room I want to stay in. So I picked that room. And so when he was helping me up with my bags, he was telling me, okay, well, this is the haunted bride room. And I was thinking, well, of course it is, because it was Valentine's Day and I was trying to get away from everything. And I was like, oh, so I'm staying in a haunted bride's room. Okay. So after he, told me a little bit about the hotel, and, it was originally a cotton mill or a cotton storage warehouse, I think is what it was. And they would load cotton onto the riverboats that came over from the Mississippi. And then, and then he tells me, okay, well, I'm going to go to town and I'll be back in a little bit. And I was like, okay. And then I realized, oh, town's like 35 miles away. You're leaving me here. And so he locks me in the hotel. They have a little push code on the door.
So you're the only guest in the hotel then at the time.
Nobody else checked in that night, so I had the run of the place.
Wow.
So
you were literally the only person in the hotel when the guy left.
yeah, he and his wife went to town. I don't even know when they came back. So it was probably a good 3 or 4 hours. I had the run of the place. He told me, just, be careful, go wherever you want, just have fun. So that's what my first half of the book is about, are my adventures that, you don't have to see paranormal stuff at night. It happens during the day too, and there was so much activity going on. And I'm learning to channel, or I've learned to channel since then. And so, I was talking to everybody and everybody was coming over to my room. I was joking. It was like a girls' party down at the end of the hall, because the little girl from across the hall who had died in a fire, and they have her bed in there, she came over. And so I was talking to the bride that was in there. And then I saw a few other people and some little children, and there's some crazy doll activity that goes on. So, gosh, I guess it was last summer, I saw a thing on Facebook where from Beyond the Fray, where they said, we're looking for nonfiction stories. And I thought, okay, I just wrote one. Why don't I submit it? And I was fully expecting them to say, no, thanks. And then like, oh my gosh, this is great. Can you write like another 10 chapters? And so I rewrote it and I added a lot more. So when I went back, there's a paranormal conference. I just got back from it a couple hours ago. It happens in April and in November, twice a year. It's called History, Haunts, and Legends. And they basically celebrate the paranormal in Jefferson. And there's investigations where you can go into private houses. And it's a big convention. And I was a vendor there this year. So I forgot where I was going. Oh, so when I was there last November for History, Haunts, and Legends, I had stayed in an Airbnb after that, and I had some of my own adventures there. I found what I thought was a giggling ghost, but it turns out it was a man who died from tuberculosis. And every time I saw him, he was, covering his mouth, and I thought he was laughing at me, but it turns out he was, actually probably coughing. So that was pretty cool, because when I was talking to the owner, he said, who was a very skeptical man about the whole thing. He goes, well, we have so many so-called psychics that come here, and they always hear him coughing, but they never see him. And only about 4 people have actually seen him. So there's number 4 right here, like, oh my gosh.
Now, I think I saw that in the book. You saw him in the window. Is that right? When you were coming into the house?
Yeah. I have, I injured my back a few years ago, and last thing I need to do is be carrying, a bunch of suitcases and stuff. So I was coming up the walkway, and it's a beautiful house. It's very symmetrical. and there was a window in the very center of the house upstairs. And I looked up and I saw a man, and he was just laughing, covering his mouth, and he was leaning against the side, the window frame. I was like, well, dude, come down and help me. And then I looked up and he was gone. I'm like, oh, okay, it's a ghost. That's it. So I carry my bags on around the corner, and it's a big wraparound porch. It's just this beautiful southern, house. And so I get to the stairs on the side. I look up and there he is again. I'm like, come on, help me, and I look up again. He's gone. So these are like, really quick, I guess, third eye visions, you can say. So I go in, and there's a lot of other stuff that happens there. I had to use my dowsing rods to find out where he was. And it turns out he was standing in my doorway. And I'm like, okay, no, you go out there.
Did he look young or did he look older when, like, you kind of describe what he looked like to you when you saw him kind of in your mind's eye?
Probably, I would say in his 50s. He was very short. He had glasses on, big red cheeks like he was sweating. His hair was greased back. But the thing that stuck out the most was his suit. And his suit was way too big. It came off his shoulders and it was pushed up on the sleeves. And when I saw him standing on the porch, his pants were real baggy and like they were rippled up, like they were way too long. And so I thought, well, perhaps he passed quickly and somebody just threw a suit on him real quick. But after I spoke with the owner and he told me, oh, he died from tuberculosis. Well, it explains everything, why his face was so red, why he was sweating. He had a fever most likely. And he was a very nice man.
Do you know kind of what year this was, time frame wise, and what age he would have passed?
No, I would probably say right before the turn of the century, around the 1900s, somewhere in there. Because he did look a little Western. He had like a black suit on, some sort of string tie that hung down. It's not quite a bolero, but like one a necktie, but it was a string,
Yeah, and true to form, I always like to, for my guests, I always like to go back and kind of hear the backstory. I think, you mentioned you have, some paranormal psychic abilities, if you will. I guess I should say psychic medium abilities. What age did that start for you? Did that start at a very young age? How did that kind of happen for you?
That's really hard to say. When I was 2, or maybe 2.5, I was playing. We lived in a very small house, and my mom and sister were in one room. All the bedrooms were on one side of the house. I was in the middle room, which you weren't supposed to be in because that's where the air conditioner was, like, don't play in the middle room. And so I was jumping on the bed. My mom and sister were in my mom's room, and they were having some sort of fight. My mom and sister always fought about something. And I was jumping on the bed because I thought this is my time to jump on the bed because they're not going to look at me. And behind me, there was a window, and the window started flickering like the tree was blowing like crazy. So I turned around and looked at the window, just caught my attention. And when I looked forward, there was a little lady standing in front of me. And I was like, okay, and she didn't say anything to me. And, and I'm 2. What do I know about telepathy? And she said, you're not like them. You're one of us. And, I remember looking at her and she looked, this is going to sound silly, but she looked like the fairy godmother out of Sleeping Beauty. So I wasn't afraid of her because this is, something that I'd seen Sleeping Beauty, I don't know how many times. So it was not a frightening figure at all. So I looked at her after she said it the first time, and she said it again. She goes, you're not like them, indicating my mom. She goes, you're one of us. And I'm like, okay. And then the window started making that flickering light again. And when I looked back, she was gone. I was like, okay, well, I didn't know. So I went and asked my mom. I said, who was that lady in the room? And she kept telling me it was my imagination, go away, And so that's happened my whole life. I started seeing people as they passed or right before they passed. When probably the first one I saw was when I was in first grade. I saw my grandfather, like hours after he passed. And he was laying on they send the kids off, so that the parents could mourn and start making the plans and stuff. And so they sent me to bed like at 6:30. I'm like, who can go to bed at 6:30? So I was playing with my animals in my bed, and they're like, be quiet in there, and it was dark, it was, before the time change and everything. And I saw this milky translucent form, and it was on my floor. And so, I stopped playing with my animals, and I was looking at it, and it started taking shape, and I realized, that's Grandpa. And then he sat up, and my bed was over on the the left-hand side, and he sat up and was looking at my door, and then he just turned his head and looked at me, and he did his finger up to his lips like, don't say anything, you know. And then he told me basically, again, telepathy, I didn't know anything about this. He's like, I'm okay, just lay down and go to sleep. I'm like, okay, yes, sir. You know, because, you know, when grandpa tells you to go to sleep, you lay down and go to sleep, you know, even though it was 6:30. So I played with my animals sideways where it looked like I was asleep. But ever since then, it's happened over and over and over when my best friends, unfortunately, have all passed. Well, I have new best friends now. But I would see them, you know, and it was kind of like a universal heads up, I guess. Like, you know, hey, something's going on, you know, just prepare. And my mom, my dad, my husband hung around for 3 weeks. So that's a whole other story. But I'd always see him, and it was always like a universal, hey, just be ready, you know. So I would start grieving, and I would start the crying process and everything in the morning. And when it actually would happen, when everybody else started falling apart, I'm like, okay, well, I've already started. So, you know, I can take up some of the slack. I can start making some plans. I can, you know, go find whatever you need or contact people. So it's just been going on. And now that I've moved to this little haunted town in the middle of nowhere, Texas, you know, they're everywhere. I see them everywhere. So it's fun.
Yeah. So now, did you have other people in your family with similar abilities? Or because I think you said your mom, the one spirit had mentioned your mom and sister are not one of you, or one of them.
I think my mom, yeah, my mom did, because every time I would tell my mom something, she'd always tell me, you're just imagining it. I'm like, well, I don't think so, you know. But I remember being about 3, and I would go to my mom and say, you know, I have a movie theater in my head. And she's like, what? And I was like, I see movies in my head, and they don't make any sense. And she's like, no, you're imagining it. Well, it wasn't into college when I started reading like all these new age books, metaphysical books. I was like, oh, that's your third eye. And that's about the time the Indigo children first hit the scene, and people were actually starting to talk about this kind of phenomenon, if you want to call it that. But I remember my dad left when I was 8. So when we would go visit my grandmother, she was out in the country. My grandmother and my aunt and my mom would all get together, and they would start talking about, oh, well, you know, I had this dream about so-and-so. And then my grandmother would say, oh, yeah, I had a dream about him too. And this happened. And my mom would say, yeah, that happened. And my aunt would chime in, oh, yeah. And so they're all having the same dream. So I don't know if the dreams actually came true, but somehow they were all connected. And they didn't live close to each other. Like, we're in Texas. My grandmother was way out in the country, and my aunt was in Georgia. So when they got together, they would always share stories like that. So there was a connection, I believe. And then when it came down to my mom and I, my mom just kept saying, well, you're imagining it. And by the way, here's the Farmer's Almanac. You know, like, well, what girl wants a Farmer's Almanac? You know, you can study the moon tides and, you know, all the astronomical stuff. And here you go, honey. I was like, well, no, I'd much rather have a Barbie, but okay. So she was denying it in a way, but yet giving me information.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've had other psychics and mediums on the show, and they kind of go through this stage, if you will, early in life where they kind of turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
And just because, you know, there's people that are not open to, you know, their experiences, they don't really want to talk about them because they don't feel safe about talking about them. So they kind of just turn it off. Did you kind of go through that as well?
After my mom kept telling me it didn't really exist, I just kept it to myself, basically. And things would happen. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to tell anybody about that. And it was probably when my friend Cheryl died. I just graduated from college, and yeah, it was like a Friday afternoon. I was in Corpus. She was up in Houston, and I just had this weird feeling, you know, something was wrong. So I tried to call her, and I couldn't get in touch with her. And so I went to work. I was like, man, this just doesn't feel good. It was that knot in your stomach, you know, you get that feeling. It went on Saturday. I tried to call her Saturday. Couldn't get in touch with her. Tried calling her Sunday. Her phone was disconnected. Now my radar's up. I'm like, oh no, something's going on. I'm boohooing. I'm crying. I can't work, you know, and it's just not a good situation. And then finally probably Monday afternoon, her mom called, and said, well, we lost her. She died. I was like, oh my God, I have been trying to call you since Friday, like 3:30, because I remember Jeopardy came on. And that's the only way I remember it, is Jeopardy comes on at 3:30. So I started calling at 3:30. And she goes, well, at 3:30, that's when they were taking her out on the gurney. She had just passed out, and she had been in a coma from Friday till when she passed. So, just got goosebumps. So that's when I knew it was real. And then time and time again, my mom died, my husband died, my dad died, 2 of my best friends died. And I would always, my grandmother, I was living with my grandmother. I always knew like a day or 2 before they passed.
So, okay, that's interesting. So it wasn't just when they passed you got a feeling. You had kind of a premonition that something was about to happen.
That's why I was saying it's kind of like a universal heads up, because, I'm the one that always cries. A hurt kitten, I'd boohoo, I cry. I'm super sensitive, I guess, to that, So I have to get it out of my system so I can be, I don't want to say productive. I guess productive is the right word.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard that before. A lot of times you'll hear a psychic medium that will say, just like once something happens, then they're like, hey, I know something's wrong. But that's interesting because you're kind of getting a premonition of it before it ever happens.
Yeah.
I also wanted to, so you've obviously had a lot of experiences with this. Do they always come and visit you, people you know? I mean, pretty much most all the people you were close to, did you always see them after it happened? And did they actually give you any messages?
Just my grandfather. He told me he was okay. And, because I was a little kid and I didn't know what death was. I know my sister was crying. My mom and dad were crying. Phone was going crazy. They sent me off to the room and they said, go, just go. I had no idea what death was. That's the first time I had to deal with, losing someone. And it was probably the long gap because my grandfather died, then my second grandfather died, and then nobody for a very, very long time until my friend Cheryl. And then it started happening over and over and over again. And so I started becoming more open to it. But it wasn't until I started, to be honest, doing Edge of the Rabbit Hole with Mike Ricksecker, I just started leaving my mind open. And when that happened, it's going to sound funny. I was living in the woodlands in Texas. People were just popping up everywhere. I mean, they're like, oh, you're living in a portal. And I was like, no, I don't think that's what it is. I think it's just, I've opened myself up to it. And people, entities, spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call them, can like target you if you're open, and they'll just pop by and say, hey, but I don't find anything frightening or scary in it because, I've never been threatened. Well, one time when I was pushed down the stairs, but that's something else. But I learned not to do that again. But yeah.
So talk about that if you don't mind. What happened there? Were you doing paranormal investigating when that happened, or what happened there?
I was actually doing the ghost tours in Old Town Spring, which is really close to Houston. And I'll admit I was a novice. I've had all my experiences, but I never did ghost tours or anything. And it's a joke. People are like, well, has anything ever followed you home? And I was like, yeah, the police followed me home all the time because, I'm coming in through a little country town at 2:00 in the morning. They're like, where are you going, lady? But something actually did follow me home one time. I didn't think it did. I thought I did all the protections I needed to do. But I was living in an apartment and my daughter was asleep, and I go in my room and I close the door, and it was midnight. I had my bedroom door locked, and right at midnight, my bedroom door flew open, and it just so hard it bounced against the wall a couple times. And I was like, well, you're not welcome here. And I just happened to have sage spray sitting by my dresser right by the door. So I just went over there and said, well, go away, and I closed my door again. Well, nothing happened. A couple of days later, you could always feel like a heaviness by the time you got to the third step because we lived in a 2-story apartment. Going up, the third step from the top was always, it felt weird. And we just thought, well, maybe the stairs are really steep or something. But I was coming down the stairs a couple of days later, and I just felt something push me, and I was holding onto the armrail or the handrail. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to fall. So I'm holding on to it. And it just pushed me. This sounds really freaky weird, but it pushed me so hard. My arm was back, I was holding onto the handrail. And when I looked up, I really wasn't looking up. I was looking back. So I know I was parallel to the floor almost. I'm like, well, I'm not going to fall down. That's a long way down. But it pushed me so hard. I went out probably 10 feet. I cleared the entire staircase, and then I just dropped straight down. And I landed like, panther or something, or cat falling. I was like, well, okay. And surely I must have broken something. So I was, I'm like, okay, my feet are okay. My ankles are okay. My legs are okay. I think I'm okay. And so I start to get up, and my arm was hurting. And so I crumpled back down, and my daughter comes running in by the time, and she's like, Mom, are you okay? And I'm like, I think so. And so I start to raise up again, and I was like, oh, no, I'm not okay. My shoulder's hurting. So I go back down, and I'm thinking, well, crap, what am I going to do now? So I just put my arms back like that, and I heard it pop. And I was like, oh, I must have dislocated my shoulder. So I went to bed. So I did whatever yanked me and pushed me so far, it like popped my shoulder out.
Wow. Did you know what it was that pushed you?
No, I asked a friend, and he said there was something there, and it was on the third step. I'm like, how did you know it was the third step? So he gave me a little, I think they call it a blessing card. It had a picture of Jesus on it. And he goes, just go put this on the step for a few days. And so I did that. And then whatever was there went away, I guess. So I learned after that, I always keep a bubble of protection around me. And I was in Jefferson this weekend. I can't remember if it was Thursday or Friday. It's all blurred together. But we were in like the line of path for tornadoes. I think it was Thursday night. And I told a friend of mine, look, we're going to put a bubble energy. Or maybe it was Friday night. That's when it was. We're putting an energy bubble around Jefferson. It's not going to happen. And they're like, oh, no, we're a level 3. Tornadoes are coming. No, they're not. So we went out to dinner, and it seriously looked like an energy bubble was over the city, because you could see the storms and the lightning all the way around us. I don't even think we got rain. We might have got some sprinkles. No tornadoes. And so, like I was telling you before we started, I'm under a tornado watch here, Crazy Texas. So I did the same thing when I got home. I was like, only love and light can come here, no tornadoes. And I don't even think we're going to get rain.
So yeah, getting back to the hotel. So you checked in, you were alone in the hotel. You said you had some visitors, a young girl. What else? You mentioned a couple of others. Who else did you come in contact with initially?
Well, the story of the room that I was staying in was there was a woman there, and I'm so sorry I've forgotten her name. But she was supposed to be getting married, but she was stood up the day of her wedding. And so that was a very tall headboard, it was seriously tall. And so she hung herself from that bed, and there's a lot of activity in that room. And when the owner had taken me up there that day, the Wednesday, he goes, okay, we had a man staying in this room Monday night, and he left, through the middle of the night. I don't even know what happened. He just up and left. I was like, okay. So there's a lot of stories about single men that check into that room. They don't stay the whole night. So, but while I was in there, again, because my back was hurt, I'm sitting on my bed, and I was typing, and I was playing on the computer, and I heard 3 very loud knocks next to me on the little table. And so I'm like, okay. And personally, I think it's rude when someone's talking to you, you should give them your full attention. So I stopped what I was doing, and I looked over at the table, and I said, hello, I'm Victoria. And so I'm waiting for something else to happen, and nothing happens. And so I'm like, okay, well, and the owner left his phone number with me before he left. And so I sent him a text. I'm like, hey, I just heard 3 loud knocks up here on the table. Is there anybody up here with me? And he's like, no, we're all downstairs, and they're way far away. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So, I'm going on, playing on my bed and typing. And then I start feeling the bed shake, and I'm like, okay, must be the train going by. And I was listening. I'm like, no, it's not the train whistle. So I didn't hear a truck or anything. It's like, okay. And a few minutes later, the bed starts shaking again. I was like, okay, nothing is going by. And so I sent him a message again. I said, hey, the bed's shaking. Is that normal? And he goes, no, not really. I'm like, okay. So little things like that kept going on all night long. So about that time, I decided it was time to go to dinner because it was getting late. And it was in January or February. And it was cold, and I didn't want to get out in the cold. So I found a place to eat dinner. And, of course, that place was haunted. So I was trying to talk to the lady, and they did not want to talk about anything paranormal. She said, yeah, I've seen things upstairs. That was it. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say anything else. Thanks for dinner. So when I came back home, when I came back to the hotel, I ran into the owner, and he's like, well, how's your stay? I'm like, oh, man, I've been having a great time. I told him about Jenny, the little girl. I told him I was in the room and this little girl came over and she was playing with the bottom of her dress. Like, she was probably like 9, 13, something like that. She looked like she was from the early 1900s. And she's like, my name is Jenny. My name is Jenny. Like how little girls do when they're playing. And his eyes got really big. And he goes, I told you about the room across the hall, and it has the bed and some other things from a bed and breakfast in Jefferson that had burned down. And I was like, yeah, sure, I remember that. And he goes, the owner's daughter died in that fire, and we have her part of her bed over there. I'm like, oh, wow, really? And he goes, yeah, her name is Jenny. I'm like, oh my gosh. It's like, well, she was over there talking to me. She seems really nice. She just wanted to play. And so I was talking to her while I was unpacking. And he said, well, what else happened? And I was like, well, this is kind of weird, but I was walking around and I had the feeling that there was a man standing, halfway down the hall behind me. And he's like, okay, what kind of man? It's like, well, I was looking out the window and I didn't want to turn around. So I was, seeing him with my third eye. And, he's very tall. He had a very hollow face, lots of wrinkles, kind of long hair. He might have had a goatee. He had something around his mouth. I couldn't tell if it was wrinkles or a goatee or something. He had a long dark jacket on. His pants were tucked in his boots. Again, he had the bow tie that hung down. It wasn't quite a bolero. A vest. He was wearing a dark overcoat, and he had another coat over his arms. But then he had this weird hat. It was kind of not a cowboy hat, and it wasn't an Abe Lincoln hat, but it was kind of flatter. And then I looked at him, and he was just staring at me. And he's like, I've seen that man. I was like, oh, okay. So you've seen him here. And he goes, about Steven Spielberg when he came, in the 70s, he came to Jefferson to make a movie. And I was like, well, no, I don't know anything about Spielberg coming here. And he goes, well, he was staying across the street in another hotel. He woke up in the middle of the night. He saw that man. It scared him so badly. He took his whole crew and they moved like 20 miles down the road to another town and stayed there. That man scared him so bad. That was the man that he turned later into the preacher or the reverend or something from Poltergeist. So I'm like, oh, well, okay, well, what's he doing over here? So apparently he's been seen around the town. So I did a little bit more research. It turns out there was a man in the 1800s who was shot in the street. He died. They brought him into the Jefferson Hotel, and he did pass there. So they think that's him. People have seen him like walking down the hall, and they start to follow him thinking he's a guest, and he's gone, So they see him all the time.
Yeah, I wanted to ask because you kind of hear that a lot of ghosts that people encounter,
mm-hmm.
perhaps spirits, if you want to call them that, kind of stuck here.
Yeah.
Do you get a sense that a lot of them that you're encountering are in that kind of, stuck realm, that they're kind of just stuck here, or do they sometimes cross over and are able to kind of just freely move back and forth?
I think you can go back and forth. I gave a presentation in Jefferson, and my whole talk was about living in a higher vibrational frequency personally, living from your heart chakra up. And when you're in the higher realms and you vibrate higher and you can alter your consciousness, like through meditation or singing bowls or, sound baths or whatever. When you vibrate higher and you have a higher harmonics, entities, spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call them, who are in a higher range can connect with you. And I think that's the way a lot of times people find me. Because they're like, oh, it's like a candle, being outside. They're like, oh, look, there's a candle over there. Let's go see. Because I had a little guy when I was living in the woodlands. It happened 3 times. I would just be, having a good time, and I was cleaning the bathroom one time, and I was cleaning the sinks and everything. And I looked up in the mirror and there was a guy standing behind me. I knew I was in the house alone. And I turned around real quick. He wasn't there. He looked like he was like an actor from Little House on the Prairie. He had the suspenders and he had the hat and the brown pants and the striped shirt. Kind of startled me. I was like, okay, well, I know I'm alone. Another time I was in the kitchen cleaning and I was washing dishes and I kind of edged out. I look up and he's there again. And he's just like, hey, he's just saying hi. So a lot of times when I do see people, they seem kind of startled because they're like, oh, she sees me. And I guess I'm as startled as they are, and then it's like our energy fields kind of cross and then they go back.
So it's oftentimes very fleeting then.
Oh, most of the time it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's only for a few seconds. So it's like they're as startled to see you as you are to see them.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So I don't know, the movie The Others comes to mind to me, and it was with Nicole Kidman.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was a brilliant plot, but in the movie, her and her kids, you think, hopefully I'm not spoiling. It's an old movie.
I saw it a long time ago, and I'm trying to remember it now.
Yeah, so they were actually. It turns out at the end of the movie, you're thinking they're alive and being haunted by spirits in the house, and it turns out they're actually deceased. And so all the experiences they were having was from the living. And so it was hopefully I didn't just spoil that for anybody, but hey, it's an old movie, but it's a brilliant plot, and so most people have probably seen it. And if you haven't, I apologize because I just spoiled it for you. Great movie though, and so I just thought of that. So sometimes, and I was on another podcast show where we were talking about it. It seems that sometimes these spirits are just as startled to see you as you are to them. So it's kind of an interesting thing because oftentimes if we see them, they may not see us. Is that right?
Right. I know when my husband passed, he was in Houston and I was living in Arizona. And this is all in the Feminine Macabre if you want to read the story because it's real long, but I won't go into all the details. But when I came into my bedroom, because I was working 2 jobs, and I came in late one night, and he was standing in the corner, and he had his face covered, and I guess he had just passed at that point. But he was wearing the suit he got married in, so that I recognized him instantly. And I'm like, "What are you doing here?" And I thought I was just seeing things, because a lot of stuff was going on there. And he had his head down, and he jerked his head up, and he looked at me like, "Oh my gosh, she could see me," And so this went on for like 3 weeks, and so we started talking. I could feel him getting in bed behind me, and I was getting over all the anger I had stored up about him. And I finally came to a place where I could accept the things he did, and I was at peace with it. And I thought that was just me trying to work through all my anger and my guilt and my frustration and stuff. And then the day after, or then he didn't show up one day. And so the next day I got an email, and it was from my brother-in-law. He said, "Please call me. Scott died." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." Okay. And so I called. We did all the things we needed to do. And one of the things I had to do was get a death certificate. So when I was trying to get the death certificate, I had to call the morgue back in Houston. And they're like, "Well, we can't, determine the cause of death due to the nature of decomposition." And I'm like, "Okay, well, this is all new to me. I don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean?" I mean, he died yesterday. And the lady goes, "No, he died about 3 weeks ago. They just found him yesterday." I was like, "Oh, so the whole 3 weeks that he had been hanging out in my apartment and I've been going through all the emotions and everything, he'd already passed." So
Wow.
There's that. I don't know.
Wow, that's heavy. So, you obviously you live in Texas. You've investigated. I mean, you are also a paranormal investigator. Do you use much equipment? And if you do, what do you work with?
Let's just say I bring a lot of equipment. I never use it. I forget. The thing I use the most is my digital recorder and my phone because, I'm like a tourist most of the time. I'm always taking pictures of stuff. But that's how I've caught a lot of stuff just by, "Oh, okay, take a picture." I've gotten full body apparitions. I've seen shadow people where I didn't think I saw shadow people, and I've taken a picture and they're there. But a lot of the times, I'll tell you one story. It was last summer. I was on it was like a charity event, and you could do ghost hunting too. And so I that's a lot of times that's the best way to get into these historical homes is to go along with the charity events and stuff. And so I kind of hang back and I don't want to disturb anybody. I walked into the venue and I was with my friend and we were whispering like, "Well, what do you think's over here? Well, I don't know. Do you see the little girl over there? Yeah, but do you see that guy?" And so we were chit-chatting, staying away from the group. We didn't want to spoil their fun. And we told the investigator, "Okay, well, there are 3 girls here." My friend picked up on the name even. I can't remember the name. And they're like, "Okay, yeah, right. We're going to use equipment." I'm like, "Well, we're equipment too, I mean, you can use us." But they dismissed us. They didn't want anything to do with our visions or whatever we were hearing or seeing. So they wanted to use the equipment. I'm like, "Well, okay." But it turns out they were both valid. There actually was a little girl that was in the room who had died at a certain age. She was like 9 or 10. She lived there. That was her bedroom. We didn't know that, but no, I don't really use equipment. I do have an Ovilus, and all the other stuff, the FLIR cameras and the K2s and all that. But when my dad died almost 2 years ago, I took the Ovilus to his grave. Everybody went back to the wake after the funeral, and so we went back. My friend and I went back to the graveside just to have some time there. And so I turned the Ovilus on, and if you know me, I'm always bitching about my hair. My hair, So the first word that came out across the Ovilus was hair. I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. And the second word was immersion. I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of weird because he just got buried. And then it immediately, the Ovilus, it's very syncopated. It's words. They don't come quickly. But this one came really quickly, like boom, boom. It said bridge completion. I was like, okay, well, I'm turning this off. He's obviously gone on, he knows I'm complaining about my hair. So, maybe that was legit. Maybe that was just us feeding into it, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do they sometimes come back to just kind of tell you that they're okay, to let you know they're okay? Or do you sometimes, are you left wanting to get that, but it doesn't come?
Only my grandfather. The past maybe month, I've seen my dad 4 times. And he's like walking in my backyard, same direction, it's just repeating. He didn't live in this town. I don't know why he's here. And then about a week or so ago, I saw him in my garage. I saw him in the rearview mirror when I had just pulled into the garage. I saw him walk by in the rearview mirror, and I thought somebody was in my garage, and I turn around, nobody's there. So I don't know why he's here. I don't know. But no, not a lot of times they come to talk or anything. If they come by, it's just to say, hey.
Yeah, and so you sometimes wonder why, they're not able to more openly just, talk, or, they're just leading. Like for me, I don't see apparitions. I've never seen one. I've been doing the paranormal for a number of years, but I do get feelings. Sometimes
Right.
Those feelings have been validated by EVP times. That's happened at least 2 or 3 different occasions. So I think you mentioned it already. Sometimes you have to listen to your body. Sometimes your body is the sensor and you feel it. So I guess kind of what I'm getting at is I guess that's the way I pick up on it, is I feel it. I don't typically, I've seen shadows or self-illuminating ball of light, but I have not seen an apparition, like a full body apparition. Shadows, yes, but shadows to me don't qualify as a full body apparition.
No.
Something you see with detail, facial features, all that kind of stuff. And I have not seen that. But I think it's interesting because there's some people that I've worked with in a paranormal group I've worked with that are a little bit more sensitive than others. And one particular person I'm thinking in the group, she has experienced things, and I've also had that been validated by EVP. Did you hear that? No, I didn't hear that. Well, I'm going back and reviewing the recorder, and there's a voice there.
Yeah.
Response, and she says. So it's interesting because I've had stuff like that be validated by the evidence, if you will.
Yeah, usually I can feel it first. I was at the Old Park Hotel in Ballinger, which is kind of West Texas. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And we were having a weekend where we dressed up in period costumes. So I was looking like, I guess, a call girl, if you want to say, or a brothel worker or whatever. And so I step out of the room, and there's a really, really long hall behind me, and it's dark because nobody's down there. I was like, ooh, I feel like somebody's down there. And I could see in my mind's eye someone like rush up on me, like they do in the movies, because I thought, they don't move like this. It was kind of jerky, like, and so it felt like it was right up on my back. You're like, well, there's no way a creepy cowboy is what it felt like, And so I had my phone up to my neck, and I said, okay, this is weird. And so I did a photo burst, and I spun around real quick. And when I got, what is it, 180 degrees around, there was the face of a cowboy. It's like, oh, so there was somebody up on my back.
Wow. Yeah. So getting back to the hotel. So how many do you think, how many ghosts, spirits did you encounter in your stay there? Was it only in one night stay? Was it more than one night? Or have you stayed there several times?
I stayed there one night last February, and then I stayed there Thursday night. That's a whole nother story. But when I was there by myself, I saw the bride, or I talked to the bride, She came through loud and clear. Apparently, there was another woman who was a call girl, prostitute, brothel worker after the bride. And she was murdered and then dumped into the bathtub, left to be, bleed out. And the guy left. No one ever caught him. So there have been reports of splashing or water running, and they go in there and there's no water. So when I was there, the toilet kept running over and over and over. And I was like, okay, haha, that's funny. Maybe it's just a wacky toilet that just keeps running. But after the third time I went in there and, tried to stop it, I was like, would you please just stop? Let me sleep. And it stopped after that. So I don't know if she went from the bathtub to the toilet or whatever. But as I was walking down the hall, when the owner was gone, the rooms are all themed upstairs. There's like a train room and a nautical room, a clown room, a doll room. And so I got to the doll room, and there's always these velvet ropes that go across the door. So you don't go in there, but you can look in, because it's a wonderful hotel. So when I looked in, I was like, hey, because I don't really like dolls that much. And so, I like Barbies. Barbies are fine, but these were like, 4-foot dolls. And there's one, and he's really famous. His name's Eddie, and he was on Fright Night, Fear Fest. I don't know, what's it called? Jack Osborne's show. Fright Club. No, was that it? Fright Club.
Yeah, I'm not sure. He's done a couple of different shows. He had the one he was doing with Katrina Weidman.
Well, this is the one.
Maybe that's the one they're doing now. I don't watch very many paranormal shows, so.
I don't either. This is the one he had with Ghost Brothers. And people would send in clips. So Eddie has been on there so many times. He actually moves. You ask him something and he'll move. Anyway, I said, hey, I'm Victoria. Can I take some pictures? And of course, it was during the day, broad daylight. Nobody said anything, so I took a few pictures. And so I get about 10 feet down the hall and I hear, hee, 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 hee. I'm like, okay, there's a motion activated doll in there. That's real cute. And so I go on down the hall and just had this creepy feeling, that something was behind me. And I turned around and one of the ropes was swinging out of the door like somebody was starting to jump rope. I was like, okay, that's weird. So, things like that would happen. And so when the owner came back, I was talking to him that night. I was like, so I triggered one of your dolls when I went by, and it started laughing after I walked away. And he said, we don't have motion activated dolls. Like, oh, okay. Well, somebody was in there laughing.
So are these like porcelain dolls?
It's all kinds. He has them hanging from the ceiling. He has them taped on the wall or nailed on the wall. There's like old dolls, antique dolls. There's like dolls from the 50s. Some are big, some are little. It's just a whole plethora of dolls in there. And I don't know who was laughing, but they were just giggling at me. But it's an interesting place. You really need to go.
That's a bit of a creep factor there.
Yeah.
Experience, because I've had weird experiences, but that would unnerve me a little bit, I would think.
Well, I honestly thought it was motion activated, and I was like, okay.
So you really didn't find that out till after the fact. So, but thinking back on that, that's got some creep factor.
Yeah, I was like, well, I'm here alone. The doll's laughing. Okay. I thought she, honestly, because I do the guns. Like, hey, and I did that. I was like, hey, can I take a picture? Because, it's always polite to ask, I think, before you take a picture. I always ask.
I think you said something in the book about using devices like, whether it be a K2 or like a millimeter, and trying to elicit responses. And I think you said something to the effect that, there's no need to do that. Something along those lines. Did I say that right?
Yeah, your body's a K2 meter. You react to magnetic frequencies. So, you don't really need to run around with a K2 meter. I don't think you do. Because if you are in tune, if you live in the higher vibrations, you react instantly. You know when somebody is behind you, or if there's something near. Like I was telling you, we were in Jefferson and we were trying to we rented an Airbnb. Beautiful house. And so I was talking to the owner, and she said, yeah, this was my dad's house. He passed away a few years ago. He lived in here until he was 96. I'm like, oh, what a great life, so there's nothing creepy here at all. And so we were trying to do a love and light energy bubble, just putting out positive energy to keep the tornadoes away from me. And as I was doing it, I felt like I had a man standing behind me, like what are you doing? You can feel the temperature change, and your hair stands up on the back of your neck, and you can just feel the pressure is different. And again, it's not scary. You know, we were like, well, we're not doing anything bad. We're just projecting love and light out. And
yeah, that's interesting because you said, you know, some people, I've had other people say that it's kind of like a cold spot or a temperature change. I typically don't feel it that way. I typically feel like it's very strong static electricity.
yeah,
So it's just interesting how different people, you know, sense it or feel it. Because I have heard other people too say, yeah, it feels really cold here, or it feels like a cold spot. I mean, it just feels like strong static electricity.
the pressure feels heavier.
Yeah.
So
that I do sense. Not typically, not, you know, maybe temperature changes. But yeah, I've learned to trust that because I have had that backed by EMP. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of your experiences, different locations in Texas. Do you have a few favorites other than we've already talked about the hotel? Any other, you know, couple of favorites on your list?
I love the Old Park Hotel because there's always something interesting there every single time you go. I mean, I don't know, I've been there like 5 or 6 times. It's amazing. I've also been to Yorktown Memorial Hospital, which there was so much that happened there. I mean, so many people died, so many passed there. There was reports of a very negative priest who was there. And so I was there, and I had my IR camera, and I was taking pictures. I was up in the choir loft, and there was a closet or a room or something on the other side of the altar. I don't know if that's where the priest got ready or something, or they stayed. And everybody was going in that room. I was like, I'm not going in that room. I don't have a good feeling. So I was up. So, you know, I exited taking pictures. And as I was taking photos, there is an outline of a robed figure in the doorway. And right after I took that picture, a lot of the investigators that were in there were like, oh, no. And they all came running out. So I guess they felt something, or something was indicated in there with their equipment. But I have him on my little camera. So that was really interesting. And
now, is it kind of just an outline or a shadow, or what exactly?
It's a definite shadow. It looks like a hooded man in a robe is what it looks like. It's kind of distorted. It has long sleeves, and it looks like a hooded man.
So I think you mentioned you kind of get feelings. Maybe you get feelings that something's in a certain direction, and then you take a picture. Is that fair? Is that kind of an accurate, like you get a sense that something's over in a certain direction, take pictures of it?
Yeah, it's a double whammy because I know, or I can feel that something is over there, and then I also know not to go over there because that's not an energy I want to take part in. So, but a lot of people like to run over there and get scared, and I'd rather not do that.
So I had this conversation earlier, another recording I was doing. What say you about energy and the energy you bring and the kind of energy you receive? If you come into a location scared and afraid, is that the kind of energy you're going to get?
Exactly. You're creating a tulpa. Yeah, if you go into a venue and you think, oh, I'm going to get pushed down the stairs, sure enough, you're going to get pushed, or you're going to fall and say, oh, well, they pushed me. I've been into the Haunted Hill House, which is up in Mineral Wells, kind of, I guess, east of here. Or maybe it's west. I don't know. It's somewhere around here. And one of the people there was like, oh, this house knows me. It knows me by name. It pushes me down the stairs. And she went sailing down the stairs. You know, personally, I think she kind of tripped and fell, but they're putting a lot of negative energy out into the atmosphere. And that's what they were experiencing. And I had a friend of mine tell me once, because I always go they're like, oh, come on over. We're doing an investigation. When I go, nothing happens. I was like, well, maybe I'm a jinx. Maybe I'm a curse. Maybe ghosts don't like me. And then I had a friend explain it to me that, like, say you're in the dark and you turn on a light, then the darkness is all gone. He goes, you are the light. And so I resonate more with the light worker, the term light worker. I was like, well, that makes sense. If I go around to places and, you know, I glow or whatever you want to call it, you know, that's the energy you're going to attract. You're going to attract the higher vibrations. And so when I was doing the ghost tours in Old Town Spring, there was a running joke that I'm a magnet for ghosts, little children ghosts. And there was always like orbs following me around about hip level. And there was an orphanage on the other side of the, town that burnt down, and they weren't able to identify all the children. So they're just kind of in unmarked graves. And I've heard these children because, I'd be out there 2 or 3 in the morning, just, messing around. And you can hear little children running through the town, and it echoes. And you can hear them laughing and playing. It's like finally they're free and they're able to run and play. And so whenever I would do the ghost tours around there, people would take pictures of me. And they're like, you have something following you. It's like, yeah, that's the kids. They like me.
Interesting. Yeah, because I always I try to kind of be neutral, if you will, when
Mm-hmm.
going to a location. I think as a group, we tend to not get too many ideas about what's going on. We don't want to be preconditioned. Mm-hmm. So just kind of an objective mindset, if you will.
Right.
I don't know if that helps or not. I don't sometimes almost feel like I repel ghosts. I don't know. We'll get in certain locations, but this is kind of a female versus male thing too. Females will get a certain feeling in a certain spot, and then maybe me and a couple of other male investigators will go to that spot, and they say, well, now it's gone.
Yeah. I think the energy that you put out is some of the energy that you bring back in. I was in I don't know why we have so many haunted brothels here. Maybe it's because I'm close to West Texas. But
we have them here in Ogden, Utah too. We
Well,
had all kinds of stuff go on here on 25th Street. So
come visit
this
me.
is Utah.
I've heard a lot about Utah and Nevada because this sounds weird. I really like going to former brothels because the energy that was there, it's always euphoria and it's lighthearted and it's fun and it's usually not negative, and that's a lot of the energy you bring back. But I was in one haunted brothel, and I get claustrophobic really easily, and there were several people in one room, so I'm like, well, I'm going to step out over here. So I was standing at the top of the staircase, and it was kind of like a little walkway around it. And there were some people in one room, and there were some people in another room, and everybody else was in this one room. And they had like a Frank's box going. And so I'm standing at the staircase, and I'm like, oh, it really smells out here. It smells like whiskey. It's just, and now it smells like body odor, and it smelled like a drunk man. And like I was telling you, you could feel the pressure. Well, I could feel the pressure in front of me that smelled like whiskey, and I could feel the pressure behind me that smelled like body odor. And then I realized, that's probably 2 entities pressing up against me. I'm here in a brothel, And I'm like, ooh, that's kind of gross. And then you could feel it. And they were like starting to touch me inappropriately. And so I stomped my foot and I said, that's not, no, you're not going to do that. And it kind of went away. And I told a friend of mine, I was like, it smells like a drunk man out here. And he was laughing. He was like, oh yeah, sure it does. And then a few minutes later, the person that was at the other end of the upper staircase part within another room, you could hear her scream like, oh, it smells like body odor in here. And I started laughing. I was like, told you I smelled that. And then
your experience was validated in that.
Yeah. And then the person in the other room goes, oh my God, what is that smell? So it was traveling from room to room. So yeah, there was really something in there. But supposedly there were a lot of, because it was near the Baker Hotel, which was a very famous hotel, they would get the call girls or the girls from the house and take them over to the Baker. And sometimes the cowboys would come over there, and so it was back and forth. And
that's interesting. So any other locations stand out to you? Have you visited the Manger? That seems to be a famous one there in San Antonio.
A long time ago, way before there was even the ghost hunters and all that kind of stuff, because I've always heard that, Teddy Roosevelt was there. And so I just wanted to go in and see the bar because the bar is exquisite. It's hand-carved wood, mahogany, And I had my 35 millimeter camera with film. That's how old this was. And so I was taking a picture of the bar, and it was beautiful. And I couldn't see this until I got the film back. But in a certain area, it looked like a little blue flame. And so, I walked around to another, different angle, and I took a picture of the bar. The blue flame was still there. Now, had I moved with my camera, the blue flame should not be there in the same spot in both, because I'm over here and then I'm over here. And then I went upstairs and I took a picture looking down. The little blue flame was still in the exact same spot. It was like by the napkin holder. So I had 3 different points of view. So that little blue flame should not have been in all 3. So that's the only thing I've gotten from the Manger, but I've always wanted to go back and investigate there.
So it was more just a kind of a casual visit, or you were?
Yeah, we I'd gone there with my family, and so I just like, oh, we're right here. I want to go in and see, because I've heard so much about it. But
Yeah, and so that's happened with me as well, or with the paranormal group I've worked with. We hear of there's a location. Like, I'll give you an example. The Leslie's Family Tree Restaurant's been in a couple of paranormal shows here in Utah. We went and investigated there, and it was kind of like anticlimactic, if you will. And so, has that kind of been your experience? Like some of the hyped up locations you've heard a lot about. It sounds like that was one of them, the Manger, perhaps. That they don't really live up to that.
Well, the Manger might. I mean, it was just during the middle of the day. We'd been at the Alamo, and it's the Manger's right across the street, so we just went over there. But I don't want to mention any names, but there is a place. Was a former brothel. There have been many books written about it. It's like the big name, it's the big draw. Like, oh, you've got to come to this place, and investigator after investigator after investigator go there. A lot of it's hype. They're like, I'm the only one to stay overnight alone, and blah 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 blah. Well, it's a tulpa. I think what you put out is what you bring in. So if you're going to go there and you're going to think you're going to be scratched or pushed down the stairs or thrown out the window or whatever it is, that's what's going to happen. Or
maybe you're going to at least think that that's what's happened.
Yeah. But I mean, the times I've been there, I mean, I have seen things. I've seen shadow figures there. It was really weird. There was this little room that a boy was supposed to live in, and I was waiting for my friend, and it was dimly lit, but it wasn't dark. And I saw what looked like 3 little tribbles from Star Trek just come rolling out. So they look like little energy balls. I was like, that is weird, and I didn't want to take my eyes off of him. And I was looking, I was like, come here, come here, come here. I was like, do you see that? And she's like, oh my gosh, yes. So I don't know what that was, but there is activity, but I don't think it is the level that it's been hyped at.
All right. Well, we're running short on time, Victoria. You want to talk about the book, where people can find it, or just all of your work, where people can find your work and more about you? And
all the books are on Amazon. The one that was just released is on barnesandnoble.com. But I have other books that I've called paranormal activity books, and they're actually activity books. They have like games, puzzles, coloring pages. You learn things. There's one that's esoteric, so there's got like sacred geometry and mandalas and all that kind of stuff. There's one that's witchy, which has like a do-it-yourself grimoire, how to do candle magic, spell magic, and all this other kind of stuff. And as you're coloring, you read about all this stuff. And then there's like little books for kids that have like Halloween stuff in it. And what was the other part of your question? I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. No, just where people find more information about you, whether websites or anything like that.
I do have a website. It's victoriamundae.com. And I found out yesterday that I am the spotlighted author on Beyond the Fray. So if you want to go to the Beyond the Fray's main website, go to the bottom of the page and read all about me. There's some articles, or there's an article about me. Some of the stuff I've done.
That's awesome. Great. Well, hey, thank you for spending the time with me, Victoria. I really appreciate it. It was great talking with you.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Best of luck in all your future endeavors. And sounds like you're busy, and you're going to continue to be busy doing the stuff you're doing. So,
yeah, it was great to finally meet you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Have a great night.